I think sometimes where we get it wrong is to get really frustrated or angry with someone in that position, to be like, oh, come on, like, can't you see all these other people have gotten better? Why don't you just get it? And I think that can be sort of like the second arrow. Like the first arrow is like the pain of the situation itself, but the second arrow is all of the judgment around it. And probably that person's internalized a lot of self-judgment from like trying their best and failing, trying their best and being like, I just don't know how to do this alone.
I held the weight of the world in my hands, but I let it go. Now I understand. I'm awake, I'm aware, I'm alive. I'm living my best recovered life.
You're listening to the Recovered Life Show, the show that helps people in recovery live their best recovered lives. And here is your host, Damon Frank.
And welcome back to the Recovered Life Show. So good to be with you here today. Man, we have a great episode today. We're going to be talking about trauma. June is Trauma Month, where we're talking about how trauma and addiction work hand in hand. What is trauma? What happens if you have it? What happens if you're trying to get sober? What happens if you are sober? So I'm so thrilled to bring on our guest, psychotherapist, Hannah Bernstein. Hannah, welcome back to the show. So glad to have you here.
It's great to be with you here today.
So glad that you're here with us. You were on our holiday show. Love that. You had such great information. So glad to have you on today to talk about this. Look, I was excited about doing this, Hannah, because as a psychotherapist, you deal with trauma a lot. I know it's one of your expertise, and that you understand this. And so many people do not. They don't understand what trauma is, how it affects them. A lot of people are trapped with their trauma. I hear it all the time on the live streams, like we were talking about before the show. Can you go over it a little bit and just talk about like, what is trauma? What is, because it's used so much, if you don't get the right coffee at Starbucks, you have trauma now. So but that's not it, obviously. What is trauma?
Well, like many terms, different people have different definitions. And one definition that I like actually could even fit the Starbucks example. It's the idea that anything that causes us pain to a degree that exceeds our capacity to cope might imprint some form of trauma. But that's obviously a spectrum. Like the kind of person who's having a meltdown because their barista gets their order wrong probably has like a historical response. There's probably a reason why they can't cope with that has a lot more to do with their past.
Obviously it's stuff that's happened in your past trauma, right? Like it's something that's happened in your past that makes you act the way that you do in the present. And is that accurate? Because, resentments do that as well, but trauma is different than resentments.
Yeah, but I think they can kind of go hand in hand. Like oftentimes, if someone's going through a resentment inventory, they're pointing to a moment of pain that exceeded their capacity. And then it's obviously worth looking at their responses to that and uncovering, ways they could shift their own behaviors. But that it gets a little tricky. I mean, I think there is nuance to like, do we have bad feelings about the past because of our own conduct or harm that occurred to us? I think it's worth unpacking in depth.
Yeah, let's unpack it. How do you know if you have trauma? Because this is the number one question. People will come on and make these bold statements, and I go, well, how do you know you have trauma? And they really can't tell me. So let's start with that, Hannah, because I know a lot of people, like, especially with the TikTok culture, everybody now diagnoses themselves with everything. I mean, I've heard everything, but like, how do you know if you actually are suffering from trauma?
Yeah. So I want to take it back a step, maybe. I'm a subjective person, obviously. Like I have my lens. Other people are going to have their lens. And as someone who's a trained trauma therapist, I do see it in a lot of places. I might over apply it in comparison to your opinion. I think we're probably aligned in that I don't think it's useful to stay stuck in a trauma narrative. I think it's more useful to address it, move through it, and get recovered. But there's a lot of different lenses. So, for example, I live in Los Angeles. I was among the people who was evacuated during the fires. And I look at a moment like that as a collective trauma. Like, even as it was happening, the nervous system responds in a fearful way. All of the anxiety, fight, flight, freeze kinds of responses are occurring because that's what they were designed for in the body. Like, clear and present danger. Having a fire is a good reason to feel scared. And then, people have committed jobs, they have responsibilities. Maybe they can't deal with the impacts of that all at once. So they kind of like buckle down and push through. And then where does that go? It has to go somewhere. And I think that's where you see either the need for help, support, therapy, or inappropriate coping mechanisms, which can include addiction. So that's just one example of many.
I love that. I love that. Like the fires, it was interesting because I'm in Los Angeles too, and we lived through the fires. We didn't have a huge impact here, but I saw them from my house. Um, and that's nothing that triggered me. But there's other things that trigger me from my past, like personal security, things like that, things that were in my childhood that had a very lasting impression that were negative on me. Those will trigger me and they will come back out of nowhere. Why does trauma come back in the most inappropriate places?
Mm,
It's so strange because like I could see if you were in a fire
mhm,
and you see something that has to do with fire, I get that. But
mhm.
when you see things like personal security, when you see things like social anxiety, when you see it applied to different things that have nothing to do with the time that you were injured and had that trauma that was created. Why is that? Why does it
Yeah.
happen like that? Because that is baffling, because people will say, "Well, I have trauma, so I can't do this." But it's like, "Well, what does that have to do? Why is that related to anything else?"
Well, my stance would be that there probably is a link, like a thematic link. So, for example, I think we get entrained in this society to be like very, very productive, sometimes productive at the cost of personal safety or personal preferences, certainly. So, if say when you were a child there was a really big focus on obedience, perfectionism, performing at a really high level, ignoring maybe personal physical needs to perform, um, I would consider that sort of like a consent trauma, to be forced to override the instincts of your body again and again to perform at a certain level. So maybe in the present, someone like tells you what to do and you have a big reaction. And it's not because it's inappropriate for someone to tell you what to do, though, like there are settings where that's a little rude or something. But the big reaction is about like having, a lot of us know the word projection now, even though it's a psychology term. A projection, like it's like the person in front of you isn't really them anymore. It's not this small moment. This small moment is maybe like responsible for 2% of the feeling. The other 98 is that controlling parent. Like you're seeing them in front of you instead. You also asked like why? Why would it come up now? I believe, and a lot of experts who talk about this subject believe, these things emerge when we have more resources, not less. These things emerge when we're kind of like ready to deal with the intensity. So there's a lot of paradoxes there. Like sometimes when people enter like the safest, most emotionally healthy romantic relationship of their life, suddenly they're with like more traumatic memories than they've ever had. And that can be very baffling. Like, why would I feel worse than I ever had when I'm finally with like a loving partner? And it's because there's like enough safety that there's finally someone to like hold it with you.
This is so interesting. I am so glad that you said that. You see, this is why you come on the show and share what you know, because I see this in addiction recovery. When somebody has trauma from not being secure, let's say that there was violence, there maybe a parent, there's violence, there was money insecurity. They're great in a pinch. I mean, I'm talking like if you have 2 cents to rub together and a wish and a dream, they're your person. They can figure it out, right? They're with you. But as soon as they start hitting some stability in sobriety, this is when the problem begins. It's almost like I don't know how to it's like being punched, but feeling it a month later, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm.
So this is not uncommon because I know a lot of people are listening to this and say, I do great in a crisis, but you take me out of that crisis, it hits me later.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and, I haven't escaped that. I mean, I think I came from a background with a certain amount of stress. I'm still drawn to high intensity. That's part of why I solicit it in my work. Like, I like being in environments where it feels like something immediate and important is happening. You see this also in people who have high pressure jobs, emergency room techs, people who work in the media. That adrenaline rush feels like home and safety to a lot of people. And yeah, it can be very destabilizing to have peace if that's what you're used to.
I love that you're saying the adrenaline thing. I was I went from getting sober in my 20s to doing just like insane things on mountain biking. Went into a career that was super high intensity, a lot of perfectionism. I see this over and over and over again. Is that a sign? So if there are people listening to this, like how do you know if you have trauma? Because I've heard a lot of people, Hannah, say, and I've heard this in 12-step meetings with people who have, they've been to Iraq, Afghanistan, what I call big T trauma. Big trauma. And then somebody who's had maybe not something less dramatic, but to them it was dramatic. To them it made a big imprint, right? Say, well, it's not trauma. That's not trauma unless it's big.
Mm,
Like the man and woman who went through Iraq. It's not that unless and that's not true, obviously. But how do you know if you might be suffering from trauma? Maybe you've done a lot of work on yourself. You've had anxiety. You've had this. You've done the work. And still something's not right. What are those signs?
yeah. So, I mean, as I mentioned before, I do think it's a spectrum. And my stance, which may be controversial, I don't know, is that it's kind of impossible to escape trauma in a human life. Like, I think part of the human condition is encountering things that are really hard for our system to process. And luckily, our minds are wise enough to kind of like set that aside and carry on until we're ready to process. But it sounds to me like part of what you're asking is, when is it bad enough to address it? Like, when is it bad enough to
Mhm.
solicit professional help or see
Yeah,
whether you meet
exactly.
like a PTSD diagnosis? Um, so like that's laid out in black and white. Like that's in the diagnostic and statistical manual. Someone like me with the power to diagnose can ask you a series of questions and see like, okay, are you having intrusive memories? Are you having dysregulated sleep? And then yeah, maybe you have PTSD, the kind of the big T trauma you're talking about as it looks in our manual now. Or maybe you have what people are now talking about as complex post traumatic stress disorder, which may be incorporated in the next manual. It seems like people are talking about it a lot. Or it might not meet either of those diagnoses. But I think if it's a persistent thought, if it's coming up enough that you're thinking about it and considering it, it's probably worth addressing. Like, why not? What could it hurt?
I have to ask this question because I know everybody that in addiction recovery is going to ask this because when somebody comes on one of our lives or calls me and says, "Hey, Damon, I think I have a drinking issue or a drug issue," eventually I'll ask them, "Well, do you think you're an alcoholic? Do you think you're a drug addict? Or do you just think that you maybe just had an unfortunate run and this no longer works for you and you just go on with your lives? It just doesn't work for you." And there, it'll come out, well, grandpa was an alcoholic, grandma was an alcoholic, my dad was an alcoholic, both sides. 3 uncles died of alcoholism. Aunt is institutionalized, right? And there's this biological thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, you were raised by alcoholics. Well, one thing I know probably is that there's codependency there at some point, right? Like there's something, because if you had to live through that, you had to make things okay. There's a lot of things that adult children of alcoholics, by the time that they get into addiction, have had to go through if they've had an adult alcoholic parent. Isn't anyone who comes from a family of adult alcoholic parent had to live through some sort of trauma? I mean,
Yeah.
really, at the end of the day, like, I mean, that's the way I look at it, because if you have to align your emotions, Hannah,
Mhm.
with somebody else being okay, like if they're not okay, I'm not okay. I got to make everything okay, or it's really not going to be okay, right? For either you, a sibling, a parent, right? Like you're that person. Isn't everybody who goes through that really have some form of trauma that they have to
Yeah,
work through?
I would agree with that. I really would. I'm aware that there's kind of this debate. I'm aware there are voices that say, like, why is everyone talking about trauma now? Like, what's going on? And my opinion on that is twofold. I think one thing that's really important is that we don't use a traumatic background to be an excuse for current behavior. Like, I think as soon as we identify that there's something to work on, it should be worked on. And certainly, I don't think it's right to treat other people unkindly and use a trauma background as an excuse. So I see why people resist the sort of person who's like, oh, I can't work. I need to be supported indefinitely because of my trauma, or I only get angry because of my trauma. Like, I don't agree with that stance. I think it's important to identify and properly treat trauma. And then I think the second thing is I don't believe that we need to stay stuck in a label forever. I think, in fact, it can be really empowering even to look at the kind of background you're talking about with like alcoholic parents or death in the family at a young age, intense illness in childhood, and use that sort of like the start of a hero's journey, like being born in fire and like being made stronger and like going on to do great things. There are upsides to the kind of skills that people have when they're good in a crisis. Like, it doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Okay, I'm so glad that you said this. And let me tell you, Hannah, when we come back from the break here, real quick,
Mm.
we're going to dive into this, because I have heard every wackadoo excuse about trauma
Mm.
and sobriety that I think one human can hear in a lifetime. So I'm going to talk with you, the expert here, and we're going to dive into some of these misconceptions about trauma and what kind of is bullshit and what's true. So we're going to get into that when we come right back from this quick break.
Recovery isn't just a journey, it's a lifestyle. And now, you can wear your recovery with pride. The Recovered Life Shop is live, packed with merch designed just for people in recovery. Whether it's a hoodie to keep you warm, a mug to start your day right, or a statement tee that lets the world know you're living your best recovered life. Need a little humor in your recovery? Grab the Resentment Some Assembly Required t-shirt. It's a classic. Ready to take massive action? Start your day with the Massive Action coffee mug. Or keep it simple and spiritual with the Chopwood Fetch Water Trucker hat. Every piece is designed to inspire, start conversations, and keep you connected to your recovery journey. And the best part? Every purchase supports great content like this and spreads the recovery message. So go to recoveredlife.tv and click on the Shop tab now.
And we're back. We are talking about trauma, how it fuels addiction. I've got psychotherapist and guest Hannah Bernstein on. So, Hannah, bless you. Before the break, it's allergy season. You know it is. It's allergy season here. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about all of these excuses you hear. And if I hear one more post, Hannah, I'm going to say I'm going to have to drive down to your office and do like 5 sessions back to back.
I'll get you in some
5
EMDR.
back to back.
Yeah.
You just book me out for the afternoon, because I'm telling you, if I hear one more thing about these really weird things about trauma, I'll tell you one that I've heard. One, if you heal your trauma, that's it. Basically, you're good with everything else in your in your life. You're never going to have any other problems. That all your problems really come to this unhealed trauma. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I'm going to find out right now, live. I'm going to find out right now. Is this true? Can we talk about the misconception? Oh, and I let me talk about the big one first. I'm never going to be able to get sober because I have trauma. That's it. It's over. I'm never going to do it. Is this true?
I sure hope not. I mean, there are levels of trauma that are incredibly debilitating and require a lot of external support. So I do think sometimes things like genuinely exceed a human's capacity to cope on their own. But I would hope that there's community support, professional support, enough resources established to give that person a safe place to kind of fall so they can rebuild. I think that's one of the reasons I'm a really big fan of 12-step is that it's an accessible and free model that gives you community and support as soon as you're willing to put in some effort. So that's one thing.
I love
But
that.
the idea that you brought up of like, once I heal my trauma, everything's going to be perfect. I haven't gotten there. I don't personally know anyone who's completely enlightened. I think instead it's like layers of the onion. Like we deal with the kind of big things first. We gain more stability. We're able to work on more nuance, create more positive self-care habits. I've seen really beautiful things where people go from being unable to sleep peacefully or being unable to be alone to being able to kind of hold themselves. Like maybe they're still having big feelings, but they can hold themselves through those feelings. And then maybe over time, the level of emotionality the volume gets turned down on it. And then I think once that person's in kind of normal range of human behavior, when they can like keep a job, show up to their commitments, be kind to their friends, then they're in the realm of like human beings. And then we get to mess up a little bit as human beings. I'm not always my contained professional self. Sometimes I get upset. Luckily, I'm better and better at catching that and repairing quickly. But
So how do you catch it? Because you've been through this yourself, and I applaud you because a lot of psychotherapists won't say anything about that, and they've been through this themselves. Can you talk about that? Like when you see this happening with you, how you catch it?
Sure, yeah. I think one big step is the willingness to own it. I think it's a kind of pride or ego defense to think that all of our behavior is in integrity. I'm a little bit fearful of people who aren't capable of admitting fault. But yeah, to address what do I do myself, I'm really into the mind-body connection. I really like embodiment. So certainly having like a meditation practice and some early exposure to things like mindful self-compassion has helped me develop like a witnessing mind alongside my human experience to kind of notice like, oh, like my heart rate's really increased. Like my breathing's really shallow now. I'm gripping my hands. This feels like anger. Maybe I take a pause. Maybe I take some breaths. Maybe I find a polite way to end this conversation and go take care of myself for a little bit. And then that's where either, finding resources online or finding a skillful practitioner can be really helpful in learning some of these like mind-body regulation techniques. So that's among my practices.
I love that, kind of giving yourself the time out and understanding that, hey, I'm going through this and it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And that reassurance is beautiful. Yeah. Telling yourself it's going to be okay. Beautiful.
I always say, we got a little echo here. I always say the light is where I always love the Rumi poem. The wound is where the light shines through, right? Mm-hmm. Because who wants to be perfect? Perfect sucks. I mean, let's be honest with you. Like, we would be bored with perfect. If everything was perfect, we would be bored with it.
I love
Why
that quote.
this idea? You know, why do we don't want to be perfect? It'd be
Yeah.
really boring.
Yeah. I'm obsessed with that quote. It's one of my favorites. There's even a really good modern play called The Bandaged Place, which is a different translation of the same quote. The Bandaged Place is where the light gets in, by a playwright named Harrison Rivers, that's about healing from trauma. And it's fantastic. Um, but yeah, that touches into like an archetype. There's this ancient myth about this god Chiron, who's like the wounded healer. And I do think maybe you've experienced this either encountering people who've been in recovery a long time or skillful practitioners. I believe there's more capacity to trust someone who's like kind of like gone into the shadow realms and come back more whole. Like they understand what it is to fall apart. And that kind of has more integrity than someone who's just like
Yes.
talking about something they've read about in a book.
So much so. You know, Hannah, I had an experience about 6 months ago where a bunch of people were around and saying, "Well, who would you call if this happened? Who would you call if this happened?" Like bad things, you know? I was just riffing with friends. We were talking and family members. And I said, "Oh my gosh." And they were like, "What's up with you? Like, why do you have the smile on your face?" I said, "I just realized that the top 5 people that I know that were outside my family that would come through for me, one was on the FBI's most wanted list. 2 were street level drug addicts for years." You know what I mean? Like, they were not people who all of them had trauma, major trauma, you know, in the system at a young age, abused, molested. Like, I all of the people that were on the top 5, because you know what I loved about them is that not only did they get into recovery and do they help other people, but Hannah, the amazing thing I found is that if they didn't have the trauma earlier on, they would not have been the person that they are now. Flat out. Like they would not be that person. And I kind of thought, I said, it's interesting. They've gone through all this stuff, and that's why I trust them, because I
Mhm.
know that they will show up. I know that they will show up and do the work if needed. Does that make sense? I know it's so weird. Like when you realize that, it's like, this isn't working against me. This, and I say this with addiction all the time too. And maybe you say this with trauma. Addiction's not working against me. It's not
Mm,
the, like, I wouldn't wish that I had it, that I had
mm,
alcoholism, but
mm.
I'm thrilled that I'm found recovery. I would
Yeah,
not be the person that I am if I didn't have that experience.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm glad you articulated that. A recent memory comes to mind for me. I'm relatively young. I'm 36 years old, and most of my peers haven't encountered like debilitating physical illness yet, thank God. Um, but I went through quite intense pneumonia in January. I had like bad enough pneumonia that I was like pretty bad at taking care of myself. And I reached out to like my 5 closest friends. And there was like very little comprehension of how to do good community care for that. People were just kind of like, I don't know, go to the doctor. Like what? And the only person in my life who like really suffers from like chronic, persistent physical illness, she knew exactly what to do. Like she was just like sending soup, offering emotional support, and like she doesn't have a lot of bandwidth most days because of the degree to which she suffers, but because she understood, she knew like how she would want to be treated in that scenario, and she treated me very well.
So it is amazing. I mean, I think the capacity to go through this, and so I want to say Hannah, and Hannah's going to join us for after the show for all of the Recovered Life Plus subscribers, and we're going to dive a little deeper into this. We're going to dive. I'm going to ask her some questions about specific healing, specific modalities, things like that, specifically what you can do in that segment. But I know there's a lot of people here that have dealt with trauma,
Mm,
and I see it a lot. I see it with people who have 20 years of sobriety. I see it with people who have been trying to get sober for 20 years. We had a person in the live come, and literally for 20 years have been trying to get sober. And
mm,
and trauma plays a big role in it. They had something major happen to them. They really can't muster up the ability to deal with it. And they either run from it, which is they run from it, and a lot of people run through it through addiction. And they have told themselves a story that it's never going to get any better. They're never going to be able to ever get any healing from this. That this is it. This is just a lot of their life. And what do you say to that person, Hannah, who's thinking that? Because I know somebody right now is watching this.
Mm.
That's what they think. That you don't understand me, Hannah. You don't get it. It's too
I
far.
Yeah, I have a ton of compassion for that person. I think sometimes where we get it wrong is to get really frustrated or angry with someone in that position, to be like, oh, come on, like, can't you see all these other people have gotten better? Why don't you just get it? And I think that can be sort of like the second arrow. Like the first arrow is like the pain of the situation itself, but the second arrow is all of the judgment around it. And probably that person's internalized a lot of self-judgment from like trying their best and failing, trying their best and being like, I just don't know how to do this alone. Or I don't know how to do this when people just meet me with so much frustration and anger. So I would suggest that those people develop enough self-trust that they can find sort of like the places they've been right. Like, what a blessing that instead of choosing to end your life, you delayed suicide through drugs. Like it's not a great coping mechanism, but it'll get you to the next day sometimes. And maybe have some compassion for yourself as you've made efforts in the past. And then find people either, in supportive communities or 12-step meetings or skillful professionals who meet you with the kind of love that you don't have for yourself. Because I really think that kind of support and care can bring a level of aliveness back and hope back that will help with the moving forward and next steps, the actions that need to be taken.
I love this. Such great words. Thank you so much, Hannah Bernstein. We're going to put links about how you can get a hold of Hannah if you have questions. And of course, on Substack and on Recovered Life TV too. I'm sure there'll be lots of comments. If you are a Recovered Life Plus subscriber, hold tight. We're going to have another episode here about this where she's going to go even deeper about trauma. And that's coming up soon. So Hannah, hold tight. After the end credits, I'm going to come right back on with you guys. Thank you so much. Hannah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Hey, if you like this episode, think about supporting us by becoming a Recovered Life Plus member. At Recovered Life TV, we're not just delivering premium recovery resources, we're empowering you with the knowledge and tools that make a real difference in the quality of your recovery. By subscribing, you gain access to ad-free content, expert insights, exclusive video and audio segments, special projects, plus so much more, all while supporting our mission to spread the recovery message far and wide. Whether you're seeking to deepen your understanding or stay updated on the latest addiction and mental health recovery trends, Recovered Life Plus is for you. Subscribe now and start living your best recovered life. Just go to recoveredlife.tv and become a Plus member today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it for holding on. That was good. I like that. Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
Oh, like a topic I specifically want to cover?
Yeah, because I can make sure to include it on this if you want.
Are you open to external resources? I'm really fond of Gabor Mate. I like him a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I might want to talk about his work.